So good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Steph. I am the events officer on the Unlocking the Severn project. And thank you all so much for attending our talk this evening, Why Do We Need Healthy Rivers? I know it's going to be a really interesting session. We have some wonderful panellists lined up for you. And it feels like a very appropriate topic to be discussing this week, as there's been some big news headlines about plans for new legislation and new data released around sewage discharge in English rivers too. So there's going to be lots to talk about and to discuss. So this event this evening is brought to you by the Unlocking the Severn project, which is a conservation and river engagement project for people and wildlife. Unlocking the Severn, for those of you who don't know, is providing fish passage at 6 barriers on the River Severn and its tributary, the River Team. And this work will restore 158 miles of river habitat and benefit a whole host of important fish species. The project also includes some exciting public engagement activities for people of all ages, interests and backgrounds, so that people can be inspired by and learn from the UK's longest river. And the project is being delivered in partnership by Canal and River Trust, Severn Rivers Trust, the Environment Agency, and Natural England. And this is all made possible from funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund and the EU LIFE programme. You'll see that we are joined on screen this evening by Laura, who is a British Sign Language interpreter, and she will be present throughout. Please be mindful that this is a live event with live interpretation and is not a translation. So before we begin, and I hand over to our panellists, I'll run through a few bits of housekeeping and then we can get started. So this webinar is being recorded and we're hoping that it will be accessible on the Unlocking the Severn YouTube channel within the next few weeks. The webinar will last approximately an hour, so we'll hear from our panellists and then we'll have time for questions from the audience. So at any time during the webinar, you can submit any questions that you have. To do this, you need to type your question into the Q&A section, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen in the control panel. We will only have limited time for questions, so we will try and get through as many as we can. But if we don't manage to get through them, we'll hopefully be able to provide some follow-up answers after the session. You're also very welcome to use the chat box throughout as well, which is you'll find located in the same control bar at the bottom of your screen. Please ensure that you have selected to send messages to all attendees so that if you have any questions, that everybody can see the questions you have, sort of any technical questions about Zoom. My colleague Pete is on hand to answer those. So I'd recommend typing a hello into the chat box, maybe let us know where you're joining us from so that you can practice using it. So if you do have any questions for our panellists, please direct those to the Q&A box, because that is the section that I'll be checking for questions later on. So during screen sharing, you should be able to see the presentation on one side of your screen and the speakers on the right-hand side, as well as Laura. If this isn't the case for you and you would like to make use of the British Sign Language interpretation, please follow these instructions. Click on the View Options button in the top centre of your screen, and then click on Side-by-Side mode, which you'll find in the drop-down menu, and you'll see a tick once this is selected. And we'll also paste these instructions into the chat box for your reference as well. Okay, so that has covered our housekeeping for today, so we'll get started with the session. As I said, it's great to have you here this evening as we discuss the question, why do we need healthy rivers? Rivers are often described as the arteries of our planet, and they're important habitats for both wildlife and for people. But sadly, the health of our rivers here in the UK is in serious decline, and very few are currently considered to be in good health. So I'm excited tonight that we're joined by 3 panellists from 2 of Unlocking the Severn's partner organisations, and they're here to share their thoughts and experiences on all things related to river health, give us an insight into the vital work being done to protect and restore these ecosystems, as well as share some positive ways that we can all get involved in river conservation as well. So tonight we'll be joined by Sarah James, who is a water quality scientist with Canal and River Trust, Alice Fallon, who is the head of community engagement at Severn Rivers Trust, and Laura Mulholland, who is an ecologist at Canal and River Trust. So as I mentioned, to start with, each of our speakers will deliver a short introduction. They'll introduce themselves and their organisation and discuss a bit about the importance of healthy river systems and some of the things that impact river health. And then after that, we'll be able to move on to your questions. So as I said, please do submit those into the Q&A box. And I also have a few that were submitted to us in advance. So I will stop sharing my screen and hand over to our first panellist, who is Sarah James, water quality scientist with Canal and River Trust.
Hi, let me know when you can see the screen.
Yeah, that's great, Sarah.
Excellent. So yes, I have a role as a water quality scientist, and I'm also called a senior environmental scientist, so I hope I'm not confusing you there. So yes, I just want to give a bit of background to the Canal and River Trust, and the first technical glitch has come. Oh, here we go. So yes, the Canal and River Trust is responsible for 2,000 miles of historic canals, rivers, docks and reservoirs in England and Wales. And you can see them all outlined in the map. We've got more listed buildings than anyone other than the National Trust and the Church of England. We're responsible for 1,000 wildlife conservation sites, and we manage and maintain 1,500 locks and over 3,000 bridges. And Laura and I work for the region called Wales and South West, which you can see. And the Trust has navigational responsibility for the River Severn between Stourport-on-Severn and Gloucester. So I'm firstly going to talk about, set the scene a bit and talk about the pressures on our water bodies. The slide on the left is a small stream that leads into the River Severn through Worcester. It's usually a very clear stream, but this photo that I took was at the end of January this year, after the real heavy rainfall events. And as you can see, it's now a really brown stream carrying lots of silt through the land and into the Severn. And as well as physically carrying all this silt, absorbed to these silt particles will be nutrients and other types of contaminants, such as heavy metals. And the nutrients in some water bodies can lead to a state of eutrophication, which can lead to increased algae and vegetation growth, which can completely dominate an area. The photo on the right is picking up on some other types of pollution that our water bodies can face. The photo showing cement that's washed off into the canal from a construction site, but also we face pollution from industry, agriculture, urban runoff, and drainage misconnections, to name but a few. Another big issue, which we've all become aware of recently, is plastics pollution. So the Trust has been involved with Coventry University to do a study a few years ago on plastic throughout our network. We took samples from rivers and canals in urban and rural stretches, and we found that plastic pollution was ubiquitous throughout. And the photo on the left is one that Coventry University produced as part of their sampling work. It's a sort of snapshot of what they filtrated out from the sediment. And as you can see, there's lots of plastic parts in there. So plastic will obviously have an impact on our wildlife. The larger parts can get caught round and trap animals, and they ingest plastic, which then impacts on their ability to feed and absorb nutrients. We've also heard of microplastics. Research is still being done to determine the full impact on aquatic fauna, but it's likely that it's going to cause impacts on their reproductive and bodily functions. So moving on, I just want to talk about impacts and costs. On the wildlife side, I think Laura and Alice will be picking up more on this, but I just wanted to talk about how it can impact on businesses, businesses that use water. So abstraction for farmers, abstraction for industries, and of course, water companies, abstracting water for our drinking water. And obviously, the more polluted the water, the greater the cost for the company that needs it. And then ultimately, there'll be a cost to us as the customer at the end. And then very specifically for the Canal and River Trust, we have annual costs for dredging the River Severn, specifically by the river locks where the sediment has dropped out, and it can cause us problems opening the gates. And the photo shows what we call a plough dredger. And as you can see in the photo showing, the plough dredger is out of water, but when it's used, it drops to the riverbed and it's basically like a giant rake and drags the silt back into the main flowing river. So I just thought I'd give you a feel for, how it can impact other sides of the business. And then I just want to sort of then move on to the sort of positive types of actions we've been getting involved in. The first one, I guess, is more reactive, but the photo on the left shows us dealing with the after effects of a pollution incident. The Trust would do their best to deal with a small pollution incident. And here we've deployed an absorbent boom, which we put round to physically contain the pollution. And also it would get absorbed into the boom itself. And once we felt the majority of the pollution had been taken up, we then take the boom out for disposal. For larger pollution incidents, we will work closely with the Environment Agency, who are our environmental regulator. And they have powers that we don't. They're able to access sites to stop pollution, and if it's a significant pollution, take a polluter to court. The photo on the right shows the yellow fish symbol, and this is part of a yellow fish campaign that we've got involved in on a number of our sites. And this involves working with local businesses who sit adjacent to our watercourses. And we'll walk around these sites and we will identify drains. We'll put dye down these drains, and where we find out that they lead directly to a watercourse, we will spray on this yellow fish sign so that it's a visual sign to anyone coming to the site that only clean water is to be poured down this drain. And then finally from me, I just want to touch up on some other work we've got involved in over the last few years. We have worked with volunteers to walk along a number of our rivers and canals to undertake discharge surveys. So we'll be recording any discharge points that we see, any obvious signs of pollution coming in from these discharges. And then we've taken this information back to our offices, and we look to see if they're licensed or unlicensed, and move forward with rectifying anything that we find. Something we found has worked really successful in the last few years is urban greening. So greening up hard edged environments that we're often finding in urban areas. And this involves installing floating reed or vegetation platforms, and as well as giving a lovely splash of green and colour into an urban environment. It also encourages wildlife in. And then my final sort of photo, I'm taking a much big step back and looking at outcomes of the Water Framework Directive. This is a European-wide directive which came in the year 2000 to protect water quality. And as part of this, river basement management plans have been produced for the 8 river basin districts. So one has been specifically produced for the River Severn basin. It's specifically written, so it identifies specific uses that need to be protected. It identifies groups that are involved, such as regulators, operators, and project initiators. It's highlighting the sort of water quality issues and a summary of water classifications. And it looks at the legislation and groups that can be utilised to bring about more water quality improvement. And it's this directive, the Water Framework Directive, that will have picked up the need for the fish barriers, for the fish passes by the river locks, which has led on to the Unlocking the Severn project, which is why we're here. So I think this is a good place for me to stop now and to sort of pass on to my other colleagues.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sarah, for sharing some of those impacts on rivers and a bit about the work that Canal and River Trust is doing. So now I will pass on to our next panellist, who is Alice Fallon. She is the Head of Community Engagement at Severn Rivers Trust.
Thank you, Steph. Good evening, everybody. I will just share my screen and hopefully this will work as it worked in our practice run. Can you see that okay?
Yes, we can see that, Alice. Thank you.
Thank you, Steph. Thanks. Well, hello, everybody. It's lovely to be here. Absolute pleasure to be representing the Severn Rivers Trust at this panel discussion. And I'm just going to give a very quick introduction to us as a charity and some of the work that we do to promote and transform our rivers in the River Severn catchment, and hopefully give you a flavour of why it's so important, which we certainly believe it is. So my name's Alice. I head up the community engagement team in the Severn Rivers Trust. And we are a small charity. I think we're actually technically medium-sized now. We've got 24 members of staff, some part-time, some full-time, and we cover a huge area. So we've grown a great deal as an organisation since I joined 4 years ago and since we started as a charity in 2008. As you can see from this map, our catchment is huge. It covers 2 countries, well, not covers, but it crosses over 2 countries, Wales and England, and multiple counties. We keep trying to do a count of how many counties our rivers flow through, and we get different numbers every time because often the rivers, even the small tributaries and streams, will be the border of a county. But we certainly know it's one of the biggest catchments in the country. And as you can see, mainly rural in nature, but we do also have some major urban conurbations as well, particularly skirting around the Black Country, but also the likes of Shrewsbury, Worcester and Gloucester, big cathedral cities and towns on the river. So a really diverse catchment that we cover. We're part of a movement which is UK-wide of rivers trusts, which cover rivers all over the country, and have an umbrella organisation called the Rivers Trust, which represents rivers nationally, and raises awareness, campaigning, and working with policymakers to improve the state of our rivers across the UK. Our vision for the River Severn and its tributaries is that we will have a vibrant and healthy Severn for everyone. So that idea of river health is really central to us as an organisation. And the way that we work is divided into three main areas. We have a river restoration team, and they are particularly working on in-stream works, improving the habitats and diversity of species within the river itself. And they also have a lot of monitoring as part of their role as well. So things like electrofishing surveys and habitat surveys to get a better understanding of the health of the river and what the rivers need. We also have a huge team of farm advisors and land management teams, so wildlife and farming agriculture experts who go out on site and work with landowners to identify improvements that can be made in land management practices. So things like natural flood management, measures that could be made on farms, or changes to water usage and rainwater harvesting, and tree planting, all kinds of interventions that can be made on farms. And that is a really growing and interesting area of our work. And then last but not least, we've got the community engagement team. That's the team that I head up. And that's really the public facing side of our work. So things like school workshops, work experience placements, whole range of volunteering opportunities, events and communications to promote the messages that rivers and healthy rivers are important and bring benefits to us all. So a quick introduction to us as a trust. I wanted to give you an idea of what we think a healthy river will look like and what we're aiming for as we continue this work. And I split it into the three themes again. So healthy watercourses in the rivers themselves. We want to reconnect habitats and corridors for wildlife. So there's a whole range of really important habitat and ecosystems which rivers will provide, not only in the channel, but on the banks and in the kind of green corridors that run alongside rivers too. So that will bring really diverse wildlife, which will support all stages of life cycles, particularly as we know lots of river species like to move around. They won't just stay in one place. The whole nature of rivers is this idea of a journey and movement and this dynamic structure, which is what we're trying to recreate and restore with our work. So we're looking to get as many kind of natural processes and forms as possible, flows of water, and also thinking about flood mitigation. We can do a lot of work which will help water get stored upstream, for example, by creating wetlands and improving wetlands. And then in terms of land management, we're looking for healthy catchments, and the whole of the River Trust system is based around a catchment-based approach, which really looks at identifying all the tiny streams and then bigger tributaries and then the main river channel, how they're all connected, and that every action that a landowner will take or that happens in a town will impact the river ultimately. So by doing actions like planting trees or improving soil quality, we can slow the flow, reduce pollution and store carbon, so have massive benefits across a whole kind of host of environmental issues. We're looking to bring down pollution that's entering the river. This is a huge problem. Agriculture is the main problem really in terms of pollution entering the river, and that's why we've put so much emphasis on our land management work. But Sarah's already mentioned depaving and rain gardens. There's lots of work to be done in urban areas too to reduce urban pollution and also store water again, so make our towns and cities more like sponges that can hold back flood water. And of course, dear to my heart is thinking about rivers at the heart of healthy communities, because they are amazing places to play, to explore, to paddle for recreation, but also wonderful places for wildlife. So we really want people to understand that, to get out there, to learn and discover, and be part of our research and monitoring. So with projects like Unlocking the Severn, where we're training up volunteers as citizen scientists to help us with our data collection, it's the ideal opportunity to discover a river and actually play a part in protecting it too. So there are some really shocking facts around the state of our rivers, and as Steph mentioned earlier, there's been a lot more momentum building as there's more stories in the news, particularly around sewage overflows. And yeah, generally pollution is a real concern that lots of people are becoming more aware of. Freshwater ecosystems are incredibly valuable and increasingly rare. So many more species live in freshwater than marine sources, and not many people know that. And it's actually a tiny percentage in terms of the actual amount of freshwater resource that we have, or habitats that we have. So really precious and important to look after. And they've seen a terrible decline, faster than any other type of habitat since 1970. So there really is an urgent need to act now. We do know that our society is really wasteful, doesn't tend to value water as much as we believe they should. Water is a really special and valuable resource that we must take better care of by addressing things like leaks, by taking action within our homes even to prevent pollution, and also try and store more water before it even enters a river. Very sad news about the number of rivers that are polluted. We're really understanding more about what kind of pollutants enter rivers and the damage this is causing. And barriers are a huge issue in terms of river connectivity, as I said. So weirs and dams that are built across the streams and prevent movement up and downstream are a massive issue, which is why it's brilliant that we're part of Unlocking the Severn, which is going to have such a huge impact and reopen over 100 miles of river freshwater for spawning fish. And most shocking of all, there is not a single river, lake or stream that's classed as in good health. That's according to the Water Framework Directive, which Sarah mentioned earlier. So I will stop there, but I do want to just highlight some of the things that you can do. And I think hopefully leave this session with a really positive message that there is still time to act, and there is so much that we can do and ways that you can get involved. So you'll hear more about Unlocking the Severn, but we have loads of volunteering opportunities, lots of communications that you can keep up to date with through social media or signing up to the newsletter, events and visits. You can come and see us at Diglis in Worcester and learn more about the Fish Pass building and the work that we're doing and the amazing species in the river. And we're also running schools workshops, virtual at the moment, but hopefully in person soon too. So there are lots of ways that you can get involved yourself and get your communities involved. There's also a big campaign at the moment to enshrine nature's recovery in law with the Environment Bill being drafted at the moment. So there's a big push from lots of NGOs and charities asking the government to make legally binding targets as part of the Environment Bill, and that will include information about rivers, about pollution, some of the big issues that are being discussed at the moment. So there's a petition which you can sign, and we can share that link in the chat. And that's it from me, and I'll hand over to the next speaker.
That's great. Thanks, Alice. Really good to hear about the work Severn Rivers Trust is doing, and I think we'd all agree that some of those statistics you shared were pretty shocking. But yeah, hopefully we'll leave today feeling a bit more positive with some ways that we can get involved. So before I hand over to our final speaker, Laura, just a reminder, if you do have any questions for our panellists at the end of this session, please do pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom, and I'll be able to ask your questions to our panellists. But yes, now to hand over to our final speaker, Laura Mulholland.
Thank you, Steph. I just want to say thanks to everybody for calling in this evening. It's great to see so many of you here who are wanting to learn more about healthy rivers and what we can do to try and make them better where we can. Yeah, I'm Laura Mulholland, ecologist for the Canal and River Trust, the same as Sarah, the first speaker. My job basically entails making sure that wildlife and their habitats are protected when we carry out our routine maintenance works along the canals. The canals in our region that I look after the most are the Gloucester and Sharpness, Bridgewater and Taunton, Kennet and Avon, and then there's a couple in South Wales, the Monmouth and Brecon and the Swansea. And as Sarah said, we're navigation only on the River Severn and also on the River Avon. So, like Sarah, It's refusing to move on. Here we go. There we are. So what does a healthy river look like? This is what I think of when I think of a healthy river. I'm afraid I've snuck away from the River Severn. This is actually the Kennet alongside the Kennet and Avon. And this part of the river is really important. It's got special protection. It's called a special area of conservation. And that's because of the range of species that it can support. This is a chalk stream in the south of England, so it's quite different from the Severn. But I just wanted to show you a really pretty picture. We've got a mosaic of vegetation here along the sides of the river. You can see it's quite meandering. The water quality is really clear, and there are lots of different species growing along the river banks. What can happen in an unhealthy river is that when the water levels start to get too low from drought or from us taking too much water out of them, then there's less space in the water for the range of aquatic species to be able to survive. Also, with the lower flows, it's any obstacles along that river, which the other two speakers have mentioned previously, those obstacles become really, really hard to get over, and that makes it almost impossible for species to migrate or move around up and downstream. As you have slower flows, you'll also have the sediment deposition that Sarah mentioned, and in that sediment there can be runoff of pollutants and fertilizers and things from the adjacent land, which then build up and become high concentrations in the sediment, which is obviously bad news. We also have the temperature can go up as the water level drops, which isn't great for the species who have evolved to survive in the temperatures that we should be having. Obviously, that's also massively linked to the climate crisis. Our seasons are out of kilter. We are warming up, but we are also having much colder, harsher winters, which is making it harder for species to survive over winter. And so rivers can be a fantastic indicator of how our ecosystems as a whole are doing. So just to show you, this is a completed fish pass on the River Severn. This is the one at Beverley, which is to the north of Worcester. I want to say up front that predators, like the ones that you can see on screen right now, are very, very unlikely. In fact, it's almost impossible for them to hunt in and adjacent to the fish pass itself. So there have been some concerns that by creating the fish pass, you provide predators an easy pickings area for them to come and feed. And actually what we've done is we've removed that easy picking area where the fish were previously gathering around the base of the weir and desperately trying to leap over it. And this is illustrated really well on the Unlocking the Severn website. They tagged some of the fish, including the protected species, the Thwaite shad, who are the pivotal species for this project. They put little transmitters in them, and you can run this animation seeing the fish migrating up and down river and getting stuck at the weirs. And then as the weirs are removed, the first one is not one of the main ones on the river, it's just off the river. You can then see that they start slowly investigating these new spawning grounds. And that's what this project is all about. It's about opening up, I think it's an additional 50 kilometres. I'm sure that I'll be corrected on that a little bit later, but it's a massive amount of river that not only the protected species, the Thwaite shad, but also other species of fish like salmon and brown trout and pike, that they can now get to these parts of the river system that have been shut off to them for hundreds of years, thanks to man's intervention to try and make the river more navigable for boats. So with these additional spawning grounds come more fish, more success at breeding. And then once you have the healthy fish, the healthy population, then you get your top predators coming in. you get your herons. I'm sure most of you will have spotted a heron fishing by the side of the river wherever you are. Bottom left, we've got a lovely family group of otters having a little preen and a play, and otters will only take enough fish to provide them with the energy that they need. They will only succeed where the river can support their population. And then finally, I know you might be thinking that's a bit of an odd animal to have on this screen. We have a common seal. This is Keith, the female common seal, who appeared up in Worcester between 2012 and 2014. We think that Keith came up the river following fish, and when she arrived in Worcester, she decided it was quite a nice place to be. So she spent a good couple of months lounging around on the floating pontoons that boats moor up to, like the one in the picture, feeding on the fish, which got her into a little bit of trouble. And there were some discussions about whether it was appropriate for her to be up as far as Worcester, and whether she ought to be captured and moved back out to sea, because it might have been that she was trapped with the high tidal range that we have on the Severn. In the end, we had really extreme floods in 2014, 2015, and with the floods, Keith disappeared. Hopefully, she swam back out to sea, but we'll never know for sure. So I'm going to hand back over to Steph now, who I believe has some questions for us.
Brilliant, thank you, Laura. Thanks for sharing a bit more about the kind of wildlife of our rivers. Yeah, so I invite all of our panellists back on to screen now. Hopefully Sarah's, there she is, there as well. Yeah, thanks all for that great overview of what is really quite a vast topic, river health. And this evening, we're only going to really scratch the surface of some of these issues, and I'm sure we could run a whole talk series about river health alone. But hopefully that's given everybody attending more of an idea about some of the problems that our rivers face, but also some of the ways that these organisations, Canal and River Trust and Severn Rivers Trust, are working to improve and safeguard these ecosystems. So you have a few questions that have been sent in, so I'm going to dive straight into those. A few that were sent in advance, and then we've also got a few appearing in the Q&A box as well. So do continue to ask your questions in there so I can pose them to our panellists. But I'll jump in with quite a meaty question to begin with that we had sent in advance for Sarah, which was somebody had said, I have heard that the general health of the river has improved, of the River Severn has improved over recent decades. Is this the case, and what is the main reason for this improvement? And what else would we like to see improved in relation to the Severn in the future?
Okay, so I think we need to sort of think back to about sort of 50, 60 years first. And yes, based on then, we have made improvements. In the past, industries were just discharging whatever they wanted into our rivers without any thought. Not necessarily the Severn, but we know, rivers were turning the colour of the dyes that were used in industries many years ago. So that's a big plus now. All discharges have to be permitted. And also recently we've started opening up what were once culverted watercourses. We've allowed them to flow more naturally again. So we've got more green and sort of biodiverse areas. So that's the good news. But the Water Framework Directive is forcing us to look at our water quality in more detail, give us a national overview. And the objective of the Water Framework Directive is that every water body is to meet a good classification by 2027. And it's that they're not meeting that. And all the facts that Alice was showing us, is, the data behind that we're not getting to good classification. So we've got the evidence. So now we just have to keep on looking at ways to improve. We've got existing systems that I think we should be using, we need to make to work better for us. And as we said before about the sort of CSOs discharging sewage into our systems, you know, now we've got the Environment Minister this week sort of saying that something needs to be done, and she wants to get more tighter numbers on what is being discharged into rivers. So we made a good start, but you know, our data is showing us we've got to do a lot more work.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. Alice, I don't know if you had anything else to add about sort of the future priorities and plans that Severn Rivers Trust have for the Severn?
I think Sarah's encapsulated everything perfectly, to be honest. Yeah, I think what we can see is happening is that we're getting a better understanding of the state of our rivers and what needs to be done. And I think we really do know what action needs to be taken. It's just about now getting the political will and the public support and the funding to make it happen. So we've got a plan in place, and yeah, now it's just about getting it done.
Brilliant, thank you. So another question we had sent in advance from Andrew was to do with flooding. So I think this one for you, Alice. The question was, what is the best way to plan against flooding along the Severn moving forward? Can monitoring mitigate against potential flooding problems, or could initiatives such as the Slow the Flow at Pickering in Yorkshire, which is a natural and sustainable flood management approach, be implemented in places such as Bewdley and Bridgnorth?
This is a great question, and I love the specifics. It really gives a flavour of the issues that we face. And yeah, flooding, as you will have seen on recent news, is a massive issue in the Severn catchment. And it's something that we're really aware of at the Severn Rivers Trust. It's a big part of the work that we do. As I mentioned earlier, our approach is to look at the catchment. So rather than saying, okay, so Bewdley floods or Gloucester floods, what do we need to do in Bewdley or Gloucester? It's about going upstream and working out where that water is coming from. Why isn't it being held back further upstream in the catchment? And natural flood management really is the way to go, with lots of small interventions, really looking at the farms where that water is coming off, or the towns or smaller villages. Why isn't the water actually being held up? And there's so much work we can do to make the land more like a sponge, which is what the function it really naturally should be serving. A lot of our work actually is looking at rainwater harvesting and storing rainwater for use on farms. So it's great for farm businesses because they're not having to take as much mains water, so they're saving money. And also looking at improving soil quality on farms as well, so reducing compaction, increasing organic matter within soils, and also increasing invertebrates. So worms especially play a really important part in aerating soil and making sure it can hold as much water as possible. But yeah, we do lots of the other maybe more familiar natural flood management work as well. So things like tree planting, as long as it's the right tree in the right place, will have a massive benefit for rivers and reducing flooding. And also things like leaky dams and woody debris in streams, which can create sort of natural processes and hold water back and store water back further up the catchment. So yeah, really great question. We certainly do take an evidence-based approach to that as well. So we follow the best kind of scientific methods in the work that we do, and use a lot of mapping data. There's a lot of GIS monitoring data that we will pull together to farm or look at and work out which interventions are needed and have the best effect, how they're going to help those communities further downstream.
Great, thanks Alice, really comprehensive answer. And Andrew's just said, yep, that's brilliant, and says thank you for that. So glad that's answered your question. Good. Andrew. Good to have that feedback. Another question that was sent in beforehand, one for Laura. What are the key indicator species of a healthy river? And perhaps you could sort of explain what we mean by indicator species as well for that one.
Sure thing, thanks Steph. So with a healthy ecosystem, it all starts at the bottom. You need to have the range of plants that then support the variety of insects that in turn provide food for the next level up, the fish. And then you have the otters right at the top, otters, seals, herons, cormorants, bigger fish like salmon, brown trout and pike. And so to ascertain how healthy a river is, you would carry out surveys to see how diverse the insects that live in the water, the aquatic insects, things like stonefly larvae, mayfly larvae, freshwater shrimp. We actually have a special method for surveying these species where we capture them in a net, and then each species basically has a different score depending on how sensitive it is to pollution and sedimentation and that sort of thing in the river. And so you add up your score, and then if you have a high score, then that means that you have a pretty healthy river. Another way of looking at it is, as I sort of mentioned at the beginning in my brief talk, that if you have the top predators feeding successfully, then that shows you that the whole ecosystem below them is also in good health. I think I may have only answered the second part of your question.
So that's great. I think yeah, that covers it. And I will say, if you're interested in learning more about those river flies that Laura mentioned and what they kind of tell us about the health of rivers, we do have a talk covering that topic next Thursday. So still tickets available for that if you want to join us and learn more about that and the methods we use. So yeah, thanks, Laura. So another question that we've had sent in this evening, possibly for Sarah, but whoever would like to answer. Simon has asked, is the dredging of silt on the River Severn restricted to certain times of year to avoid the impact on migrating and spawning fish?
Yeah, it's a very easy answer. Yes, it is. And our main key times that we can't work is actually, we're sort of in it at the moment. And it's because, yeah, things like the twait shad and the salmon are all going up the river to spawn. We work very closely with the Environment Agency on this type of thing. And we actually have a dredging calendar, which we've worked between our specialists and their specialists. So we know, and we've even divided up into different types of dredging, when we can and when we can't dredge.
Brilliant. Thank you for that one, Sarah. Okay, and another question related to these recent government announcements that we mentioned in relation to sewage discharges in our rivers. Someone has asked what Severn Rivers Trust or Canal and River Trust might be doing to engage in work related to this. Do you want to answer that first?
I'll jump in first then if you want to. So if we have a concern about a sort of discharge coming into one of our waters, it'd be something that we would raise with the Environment Agency or with the water company. I think the other thing to think of is that the water companies are dealing with a system that was set up hundreds of years ago. They weren't anticipating this type of event, so they're having to do some scrabbling in the background to work out what to do. And I know colleagues are talking about, can we look at sort of end of pipe solutions to try and minimize the impact of these CSOs. I haven't seen anything practical in action, and I'd be interested to, because I think the sewage tends to come in when we've got lots of rainfall, but I know that might be a temporary solution, is an end of pipe solution.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Alice, did you want to?
Yeah, so just from Severn Rivers Trust point of view, it's something that we've been doing a lot of work on, in particular in partnership with the Central Rivers Trust organisation, who have a fantastic map which is openly available and maps CSO discharges. So you can go on and find your local river and see if there have been any events where sewage is potentially being pumped into your local river. And I think that really highlights the state of the situation and shocks a lot of people, so they don't know that it's necessarily been happening. But also we're really lucky in the Severn catchment to have a very supportive and forward-thinking water company. So Severn Trent I would have to say are really important partners for us, and they really are taking this incredibly seriously and looking at really innovative ways to invest and improve the situation. So with things like integrated wetlands, so wetlands created that can actually act as water stores but also reducing pollution, and much cheaper actually and more effective than expensive kind of treatment plants, but also providing space for nature and even potentially recreation. So there is a lot of work going on to think about how we can address this in terms of monitoring, getting a better understanding of the picture and the situation, and also implementing real change on the ground. So yeah, another example is that I know we're working with Severn Trent to think about bathing water status for some of our rivers. So possibly the River Team or the River Avon are kind of up for grabs at the moment, and we're looking at what needs to happen in those catchments to make them safe for people to swim in and play in. And big changes like that, which we really haven't seen on the cards, certainly in my lifetime, it is going to make a big difference, and it is being taken seriously at local, regional and national level.
That's great, thank you. Another question come in from Hazel this evening. From a governance point of view, how do Canal and River Trust and Severn Rivers Trust work with local government, integrate with local government work, sorry?
Do you want me to answer that one from our point of view first?
Yeah.
So very closely, in short, I think we see ourselves at the Severn Rivers Trust as being a bridge between local communities and kind of grassroots movements and organisations, and that kind of local and then regional and national governance too. So we're organised into what are called kind of catchment-based approach, or CABA groups, and that's around the kind of main tributaries of the River Severn and the landmass where water will flow into those tributaries. There's 6 of them on our patch, and that really brings together key stakeholders, including local governing bodies, but also representatives from the Environment Agency and community groups and agriculture business. So anyone who's kind of got a stake in the river and its management. And that's a chance for us to develop projects together, to look at the funding opportunities that are coming up, ways that we can work together to improve the health of the river. So yeah, having those conversations at different scales is really essential to the way that we work.
That's great. Sarah or Laura, I don't know if you had anything to add for Canal River Trust point.
Probably more ad hoc for us. You know, when we get the opportunity, then we will do. And I think Laura's sent something now, so hopefully she said the same as me. So yeah, when we get an opportunity, you know, we sort of take advantage of that.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you both. A question from Ian just come in. Ian asked, does the connectivity of the canal network in the West Midlands have a negative impact on the river quality in the Severn? And if so, what can be done to mitigate this?
No, I don't think it does. About sort of 10, 15 years ago, we did a lot of work up in the West Midlands Canal. We did a lot of environmental dredging. So we were dredging out a lot of the contaminated silts that were in the main part of Birmingham that we knew were heavily contaminated. So that's been taken away. And I think my colleagues in West Midlands are finding more and more sort of, you know, wild animals, otters, making them their homes in the West Midlands Canal. So no, I don't think we do.
Brilliant. That's good to hear. A really interesting question from Sarah, who has a question. This question is for Sarah. Obviously, an important part of river health and the kind of future of our healthy rivers is that we have people such as yourselves doing an amazing job to help protect and restore it. So Sarah has asked, what advice would you give to an environmental science student wanting to work in a similar role to yours?
Well, I suppose the very obvious thing is that there are sort of, you know, environmental journals and places which are advertising environmental jobs, but I'm sure that's obvious. I think the main thing we're finding a lot of students are doing are sort of looking for volunteer posts. We have a lot of, you know, environmental volunteers at the trust, you know, who get actually to do, you know, sort of very practical, you know, work on site. Like I said, we had the discharges survey. Some of that was undertaken by students. So I think looking for volunteering works with environmental organisation would be a really good step forward.
Brilliant, thanks Sarah. Laura, I don't know if you had anything to add from sort of an ecologist point of view for any budding ecologists.
It's actually a topic that quite often comes up in the ecology forums that I'm a part of. And at the moment, the process is very much that you volunteer as much as you can, you go to university, you get involved with local groups like the bat groups, the amphibian groups, the dormouse groups, all of these different specific interest groups. And then eventually you might be lucky enough to find a job in ecology. It is really competitive, and that's quite an exclusive and what's the word, like discriminatory pathway, because people from poorer backgrounds are really struggling to get into the ecology and environmental sector because they can't necessarily afford to do that volunteering experience that every organisation seems to require them to have. And it's something that our professional body, the Chartered Institute of Ecologists and Environmental Managers, is starting to seriously take a look at now. So at the moment, the only advice I can give is follow that traditional pathway of volunteer, volunteer, volunteer. But hopefully there might be some different pathways, more apprenticeships perhaps coming through in the future.
Brilliant. Thank you, Laura. Alice, I could see you nodding along there. Do you have anything to add? Because I know this is an area you're really kind of passionate about.
Really passionate about this. Thank you for letting me speak on this one. But yeah, and Laura she beat me to it, but I was just going to jump in and say we really are taking this seriously as well, and establishing paid traineeships and apprenticeships is very important, and lots of organisations, charities like ours, wildlife organisations, are getting the message and starting to bring in funding so that we can offer paid placements to train people up without necessarily expecting them to have a degree and loads of experience. But what you do need if you want to get into this career is bags of enthusiasm and commitment. We're really happy if you've worked in other areas, you're working in hospitality or something unrelated, but do think, what skills do I need to get into the sector? Do your homework, find the job adverts that are out there, and then match those skills. So go and do short courses. There's loads of resources that you can find for free online. Get out into the environment, learn your species ID, and build up that CV so that you can apply for paid jobs if you can't volunteer. But also I'd say there's lots of flexible volunteering as well, so it doesn't necessarily have to all be out and about doing practical work on the weekdays when you're busy. So do look at other opportunities within your Rivers Trust or Wildlife Trust or other organisations and groups around, because there should be something pretty much for everyone, depending on what availability you've got and what commitment you can give. But if you're interested, I definitely recommend it. It's a fantastic place to work.
Thanks, Alice. Yeah, and I think this year has highlighted to many of us that flexible volunteering opportunities, flexible courses are all possible, you know, being done virtually, and we're doing virtual volunteering through Unlocking the Severn as well. So hopefully that opens up kind of more to people who might otherwise struggle with the kind of normal volunteering route as well. I'm aware that we are running over time slightly. I do have two last questions though to cover, which hopefully we'll be able to do and people won't mind hanging on to hear the answer to these. So another question that was sent in to us in advance of the talk is was about beavers. So we've spoken a little bit about species that show us about healthy rivers, but I guess this is thinking about species that might help to improve our river health. And many people might be aware of some of the successful reintroduction projects happening all across the UK. So the question, which I think, Alice, you might be able to answer for us, is what is the benefit of reintroducing beavers?
So beavers are amazing mammals because they are ecosystem engineers. The first thing to say and make really clear, which lots of people forget or don't realise, is they don't eat fish. So they are herbivores, and what they do by building dams and building their kind of engineering the river is the kind of natural flood management processes I was describing earlier. They help rivers to actually store water upstream by building natural leaky dams. So that's the benefit, is that they create massive diversity in river habitats, but also provide kind of natural flood management, what we call an ecosystem service. But at the Rivers Trust and at the Severn Rivers Trust, we are, I would say, maybe cautious compared to some of the more strident kind of rewilding advocates. And that's particularly because we certainly favour an evidence-based approach and more research and monitoring to really understand what the impact of beaver introduction will be in different locations. So we're keen on beavers. We can definitely see the benefits, but we want to make sure where reintroductions happen, they're really carefully controlled, monitored, so that we can understand what processes happen as a result and how we can make sure they're as beneficial for the river health as possible. So watch this space. I really do hope that we will see a few more beavers in the Severn catchment in the near future.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Alice. So a final question just to end on that was sent in by Alicia in advance. I think this is a really nice question to end on. So I've been saving it to last for a reason. And I think hopefully all of our panellists can chip in on this one. But Alicia has asked, what are our top tips on spreading the word with positive messages to others on what they can do? Because I think this whole topic of river conservation can often be very overwhelming, can't it? And it's very easy to focus on the doom and gloom all the time. But yeah, what are your top tips on spreading positive messages, or perhaps, you know, top tips, ways people can get involved and feel positive about river conservation? I don't mind who wants to start. Alice, you've got your microphone on. So.
happy to jump in. I think this is such a lovely question to finish on. And I think be positive about river restoration. It's such an exciting area because things happen really quickly, and actions like Unlocking the Severn are going to see really dramatic benefits very quickly. So it's one of the good news stories, I guess, in a world that's full of some really scary patterns with things like climate change that feel really big and overwhelming. This is something where the actions we take really can make a difference quite quickly. So yeah, please get down to your rivers, discover, enjoy, explore them, take pictures of them, share messages, talk about them with your friends and family, and get involved, because there's so much to be proud of, to celebrate and to be part of. So I guess that kind of sums up what I would like people to take away from this.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alice. Sarah? Sorry, picking on you random order.
That's right. Yeah. So sort of, I've put sort of keep it local, and yeah, talk about what you're doing and why you're doing it. I think, you know, that's one thing I sort of discover. I talk to people about things, and they often ask lots of questions because they hadn't even thought about it. So yeah, just talk about it. And then on a very more practical note, if you do see a pollution incident, you know, call it into the Environment Agency. They have an incident number. And, you know, if there's one area where there's lots of pollution incidents happening, the more calls that go in, you know, the higher it goes up their sort of register of interest. So yeah, a bit of a practical one as well there.
That's a really great one. Thank you, Sarah. And finally, Laura, do you have any sort of positive messages?
I do. I'm going to start a tiny bit negative and say that the crisis that our rivers are in is really similar, and intrinsically linked to the wider climate crisis that we're in. And so the most important thing that I would say people can do is find out as much as you can about the things that you can do, the practical things that you can do in your own home. For example, how to save water, because water usage is way too high, and that's going to be a major problem in the next few years. Learn about plastics, not only reducing your use of single-use plastics, but also thinking about the longer term plastic products that you may have that you don't even realize, like that it's in a lot of clothing. You can get things that capture the microplastics that are released from clothing that you can put in your washing machines, for example. I mean, there are loads and loads and loads of things. And then, as the other two had said, spread that message. But you have to be really careful. And I realize that I've just done exactly what I'm going to tell you not to do. You have to be really careful to not come on too strong. The idea is to plant a seed, walk away, and then let them come to you with more questions. But the best way to help others is to be as educated as you can yourself on the topic. And there's so many different resources out there. I recently attended a series of talks by an organisation called Aim High called How to Talk About the Climate Crisis, and it was fantastic. So I highly recommend that. But I think that whilst big government, big industry, yes, they have their place to play, they do need to do stuff. Collectively as society, if we all did everything that we can, actually we could make some really big changes together.
Brilliant, thank you all. That's a really nice one to end on. I know Alice has also shared like a petition that you can sign as well, so that's another way I think we can share positive messages, writing to our MPs as well. But yeah, just being really positive about our rivers as well, and showing everyone how great and amazing they are. No, that's all fantastic. Well, I think we've got to the end of our event, so I just want to thank all of our panellists for their input this evening. It's been really fascinating to learn about what you and your organisations do. Yeah, some of those kind of big problems that we face, but like we said, thinking about the positives as well, and all the great work that is being done. Thank you everybody who has attended this evening. We really hope you've enjoyed learning a bit more about the need for healthy rivers and what we can do, and perhaps you've been inspired to get involved in river conservation wherever you are as well, whether that's through volunteering, supporting online campaigns, sharing what you've learned with friends and family. Hopefully you'll take away some of these positive messages from this evening as well. So we have put a link to a survey in the text box, and I'll be emailing this out as well, and we'd be really grateful if you could spare a few minutes of your time to tell us how you found this evening. Please do go to our website, which is www.unlockingthesevern.co.uk for more information on the remaining talks in this series, and you can also get access to recordings of previous talks as well. And there you can find out more about the Unlocking the Severn project and the work that we're doing, find out more about our volunteering opportunities, our schools outreach, events that we'll be running as well. So again, if you live near Worcester and the River Severn, hopefully lots for you to get involved with there. And if you'd like to keep up to date with the project, then you can sign up to our newsletter on our website as well, or find us on social media with the @SevernUnlocked handle on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. And Severn Rivers Trust and Canal and River Trust also have websites and social media as well, so you can find out more about their work and about their kind of volunteering opportunities and campaigns too. So yeah, they're great places to head to. So I've already mentioned next week's talk in the series is on riverfly, and we also have a talk the following week which is on citizen science happening on the River Severn. So that would be a really good talk to attend if you're interested in finding more about the kind of practical volunteering you can do to help with the Unlocking the Severn project as well. As I said, all the details for that are on our website, which has been shared in the chat box. So yeah, just wanted to end there really and say thank you so much again for attending and for your support, and we look forward to seeing you at another event in the future.